Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread.
Is fat cell memory the hidden reason for weight regain? Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. I am your host today, Dr. Vera, talking about a most intriguing phenomena that may explain why weight regain seems inevitable. Today I am speaking with Dr. Ferdinand von Meyenn, who is a co-author of a significant paper, Adipose Tissue Retains an Epigenetic Memory of Obesity After Weight Loss. This article discusses why losing weight and keeping it off can be so challenging. Might our fat cells actually remember past obesity? Professor von Meyenn is an assistant professor at the ETH Zurich Department of Health Sciences and Technology, where he leads research on nutrition and metabolic epigenetics. He studied biochemistry at the Technical University in Munich, got his PhD at ETH Zurich, and completed postdoctoral work on epigenetic mechanisms at the Babraham Cambridge. He has published over 60 peer-reviewed scientific articles, with his work featured in leading journals such as Nature and Cell. Welcome, Dr. von Meyenn.
Thank you very much. Great being here.
Thank you. What is it that got you into this particular field of obesity and weight loss, and especially weight regain?
It's probably a longer journey in the end, which more or less starts with my PhD here at ETH Zurich, where I was working on metabolism, endocrinology, particular type 2 diabetes. And obviously in that context, overweight is a key primary cause for then later on diabetes development. And so for a long time, I've been interested in that. And I think with then the work I did subsequently looking at epigenetics, we're primarily interested in this long-term changing of processes. Suddenly, many of these phenotypes, which are reliant on prior states, become quite interesting. And so weight gain, weight loss, all of what's connected to that seem to be somewhere in there with this whole metabolic changes. And one part, obviously, which is quite in addition to that, and why definitely working on that is quite exciting and relevant, I believe, is the huge relevance for society, for all our work, that if we look at many diseases, chronic metabolic diseases overall, so many of these diseases which are not caused by genetic defects or any other reasons, but just by our lifestyle, these seem to be rising, become really a major challenge for society. And so that's an area which really we want to explore and find maybe ways into it, particularly with many current strategies not being sufficient.
Thought we might start with some definitions. You use the term obesogenic memory and epigenetics. Just give us some basic definitions, please.
So the idea of obesogenic memory is probably not a term that we coined. I think that's been around for quite a long time. Actually, if you go into literature and start searching for nutrition memory, obesogenic memory, you'll probably find hundreds of articles discussing the idea behind that. And at the end, it is the fact that once people have gained weight, are overweight, this new weight seems to be defining. So we seem to be very good in our body, very good in remembering and changing upwards our body weight. And so there seems to be something with what we eat, what we do, how much we eat that really changes. And that's where I think this obesogenic memory comes from. There's also this whole idea that nutrition very much shapes who we are. And so again, this nutritional memory. So this long-term affecting of that and how that's in there. And I think in many cases that obviously could be just overall changes. We gain fat mass, and so there's more there. And so that could be one kind of memory, the physiology changes. But that's the part where we then probably come in with the epigenetics. And epigenetics is basically that what we would consider from the terminology on top of the genetics. So everybody of us with birth gets one very specific DNA information from our parents, half from the father, half from the mother. And that's the blueprint for all the functions, for all the physiology that we have in our body. Basically, every cell in our body carries that same identical genetic information. Yet, and that's where the epigenetics comes in, is every cell has a specialized function. A liver cell and a brain cell or a neuron are very different in what they should do, yet they operate based on the same genetic blueprint. And now the epigenetics allows each individual cell to actually know which part of that blueprint to use. You can imagine it like a book. If you have a very big book with an encyclopedia with all the information in it, you may not need it every time, all of that information. But maybe there's some information that is relevant to your task, to your project, and you probably would highlight that. Maybe you would even put a few pages you don't need to cross them out if you never will use them again. And similarly, we can think of epigenetics. Some part of this DNA, of the genetic background or the genetic information is labeled as relevant for that cell type, and others said we don't need it, we close it down. What adds on to that, and that's where now the obesogenic memory maybe comes in, or many things of our life, because a liver cell, while it may be a liver cell and for hopefully the rest of its life will stay a liver cell, not become cancerous and anything else, this information has to be rather stable, so long-term. Yet a liver cell may face a situation where there's a lot of glucose, there's a lot of fat, where maybe starvation. And so really the cell has to adopt its functioning based on the current status. And to turn on genes, to turn off genes, again, that's epigenetic processes. So these processes are on the one hand quite stable, very long-lived, maintaining cellular identity, and yet allowing to respond to environmental, metabolic, or other cues. So also dynamically adaptable.
So all of our cells have the blueprint to be any cell, but they are their function, the liver cell, the fat cell, the brain cell, or neurons. Tell us about fat cells. How are they specifically or especially affected by environment?
I'm actually not 100% sure if fat cells are very unique in the way they're affected. Maybe first, very quickly answering to this, that every cell is epigenetically determined, and that's a process during development. So every cell in our body has a cell which is derived from, and a cell derived from, and so on, until at the end you come up to the fertilized egg. And so this one obviously has been dividing, in which each division and each cell fate decision, some epigenetic information has been added or changed or remodeled, and all of the daughter cells will remember that kind of information. And now we obviously have some cells which probably are very stable, they're very long-term sitting there, then maybe not so much affected by the environment. And other cells, in specific cases, will be much more. And the adipocytes, obviously, so the fat cells in the adipose tissue, they are obviously those which have to store excess energy in situations where we have excess nutrient availability and not so much use it. So basically, if you eat more than what we need, given our current status in the body or physiology. And so these cells have now to deal with that situation. And one thing that will happen there is that they somehow change their transcription profile. They will change genes that they need to process this excess energy, store it as fat. And these changes then seem to be leaving a long-term imprint. So cell, maybe we could think about it, gets more used to that environment. If they're all the time exposed, these situations happen. And maybe we should still add, we don't have yet proven that really this is a long-term process of really further and further reinforcing it. But if you look at our data, and particularly those where we looked over several periods of times, it seems the longer a fat cell is exposed to that environment, the more and the stronger the epigenetic changes are that allow it to adapt to that environmental status.
Is there something potentially in the environment that would promote more adipose tissue in one family member than another? Why is it?
What we definitely see is obviously that there is an early on exposure. And so basically, we even have this phenotype that children, or particularly in animal models, are born to mothers being in an environment of high fat content, obese mothers or mothers living with obesity, that these are more prone to also then gain some of these features. And that might be that basically there's some priming early on happening, which then will allow more fat cells to be made, fat cells be more efficiently storing that, maybe even having more signals towards the brain to signal that more fat is needed. And I think that's maybe something we'll later talk about, that the fat obviously is primarily storing, but is in touch and in exchange of information, exchange through hormones, through other signals with the rest of the body. And I think that's a critical part that allows it. And so, yes, we have the genetic blueprint, which to a good extent will actually determine our body mass index, but a range. And then we have obviously environment, which will then allow us to actually deviate from that genetically ideal set point that we want, either higher or lower. And unfortunately, in our environment where energy is in excess, we see that normally it's rather higher than lower.
Can you explain now, I guess it's the central thesis of how being exposed to a particular environment, a fat cell, you're saying the DNA, the blueprint will modify to absorb the extra energy. Have I got it right?
Yeah, what the expectation is, and we see it also obviously with the genes which are activated. So normally for a specific gene to be activated, this gene is encoded on this DNA blueprint with a specific region on the DNA, which basically allows the cell to make a certain gene, a transcript, a protein in the end. And if there's not a protein that is needed to process fat, to store fat, a cell which has a lot of exposure to fat will, in an ideal scenario, increase the level it's making that protein to a level where basically it's needed and satisfy the needs. And that activation of that gene at the genetic level now requires epigenetic changes. Basically, the region where this gene is will now, basically, as we said before with the marker, be labeled as active and maybe even as very active or extremely active. And this mark is an epigenetic one that is put on there, or even more. And that way allows the cell, while the stimulus is there, to be very much producing of that specific gene, of that protein that it needs. What we now believe is obviously, as we have this exposure, continuous or chronic exposure, the whole epigenome is to some degree remodeled to be prepared for that situation. You would basically could think of that. And again, this is something how we interpret the data without having fully confirmed every part of that. But you would think that someone every morning eating a lot, and then for lunch having a big burger, and then in the evening another big portion, so the body constantly be exposed to a high number of nutrients, excess nutrients. The fat cells all the time have to process them. Over the chronic time, the fat cells would be prepared. So it's not every morning being again surprised, oh, suddenly there's a lot of energy. No, it's already expecting. And so the whole metabolism of the fat cells is ready to very quickly process it. And I think to a large extent, this epigenetic adaptability really allows us also to be modifying and adapting to the environment to be more fit for the environment. Because in some way, that's our environment or the body's environment, that state. And so it's better processing. It's really prepared.
The term you used was remodeling. It's a remodeling in the expectation of this new environmental change. And that is the evolutionary advantage.
That's, I think, the way we'd interpret it. It allows a body, an organism, to be prepared for what comes. It also, maybe if we jump a bit ahead, if you think of transgenerational effects, so basically what we transmit to our children, we actually see that our body is very good in erasing that. And there may be some parts that are transmitted, but overall, much of the information that we have is deleted. But if you go to a very different type of organism, if you go to plants, which basically cannot run away from a status, they're basically the seeds fall next to it. So all of the offspring of a plant will be exposed again to the very same environment. Here we have many very good mechanisms of epigenetic maintenance that actually from the parents, so to speak, to the children of the plants can maintain that information. And that maybe in some way, on an evolutionary way, indicates that indeed this information is really there to transmit information of environment over short periods of time. So not in a sense where evolution plays a role, but rather at a shorter period. And for us humans, where if there's no food, we probably will move away from there and go somewhere to find food. And that will be a very good mechanism to erase that information. Yet, that's maybe also what we haven't talked about much, we still see that some of these information may also be long-term and transmitted to the children for mechanisms which are not fully yet all understood.
You mean to our children, so that there may be something that's transmitted into the next generation?
Yes.
Okay. So is what you're talking about possibly an explanation for what we call a set point theory? The idea that a person gets a particular weight and then that's their set point, but then when they're exposed to an obesogenic environment, the set point changes. It's this resculpturing. That's
the whole set point theory, I think, is very exciting and also very much debated. I think some people being very much in favor of it and others.
Well, I was wondering, is this proof of it?
I wouldn't go as far as saying proof, because this, in our study at this point still, it's mostly correlation, we have to still admit. We basically show in the context of overweight, obesity, the epigenome changes, the transcriptome changes. We will see then after weight loss that many of these changes have not gone, they're still there. Yet are these truly the main ones driving this weight regain? That things that is very hard to show, because obviously here now causality. Proving causality here would mean we actively remodel, we actively can change it, and then suddenly we erase it. We have not done the experiment. I would say that we still believe that there is a causal element in there, but we have not shown it, and so we may be wrong about that. But at the same time, I think the idea that the set point can shift, and we see that it mostly shifts in one direction, and it's maybe people over their life course can, or in most of them actually will rather gain more weight and very rarely will constantly lose weight. maybe indicates that there is a dynamic adaptability of our body weight, and maybe long-term processes which have formed some kind of memory would be ideal candidates. And I think that's where epigenetic mechanisms would come in play.
Yeah.
Again, we need to prove it, but if you would ask me, yes, I believe it's part of this whole idea.
We have a homeostatic mechanism. It's just basic biology everywhere. And that once you have a weight, the body wants to go back to that same weight. But the weight tends to go up, but it doesn't go down. It's unidirectional. And this might be an explanation for that, this resculpturing.
Very quickly, something to it.
Yeah.
And so we obviously know that short-term weight changes go normally back to where they were. So if you think of, we're not just shortly before Christmas, a typical period where people slightly overeat, gain a few kilos or a few pounds, this extra weight gain, most people will then also shortly after lose again. So there's actually probably the body has a very good sense of normal body weight and will fluctuate a bit around it, but actually be rather stable. What we now see is more these long-term changes, people being long-term exposed to an environment where they overeat. And so we get this constant gain of weight. And then this seems to be constantly slightly pushing up our body weight. And then from there, really going back and changing it. That seems to be the challenge. So short-term changes, I think our body can cope with. You go up. You also do a fasting. You lose 3, 4, 5 pounds or kilos. You go down and actually very quickly relapse back to the original body weight. The long-term ones seem to be the interesting ones, at least from our perspective. Yeah. And if you talk about the long-term ones, the surprising part seems to be there. Upwards is easy. Down, so far, seems to be very challenging.
Yes. I have the privilege of working with a lot of people who have lost a lot of weight and have maintained it for a long time because they've changed their epigenetics, their environment. And I'm talking about not just months, years, 20 years of following a specific, maybe it's keto or some kind of a program. And then they slip off and the weight comes back, rebound. It does seem to be unidirectional, that the body just wants to hold on to the weight. And if it loses that weight, it wants to go back to that.
Yeah, that's definitely the clinical observation we have.
Yeah.
Also from colleagues. I don't have now the exact numbers, but on average, we say within 5 years, 80% of people regain the weight, or at least they regain weight, whether it's fully back to the original level or close to it. And that holds true now for lifestyle interventions, pretty much all of those that we have looked at, but also holds true for many of these new weight loss medications. The moment people stop taking them, they normally regain weight. And this is, we can probably think about theories why this might be the case. Evolutionary, nobody, I would say, so far died because of overeating in the evolutionary context. That's basically not happened. 200 years, 300 years ago, even 1,000 years ago, it didn't exist a situation where there was too much food. Our bodies evolved to a situation where actually most of the time there is not enough food. And so whatever food you have, you want to keep it.
Yes.
And weight loss is an alarm signal for the body. It basically means we are in a situation where we are losing energy. And if this keeps going, we'll die. And that may be a mechanism which the body very much defends body weight in a way of survival.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And now we are suddenly in a situation where it has all changed. Now we can sit in the chair, we can eat, we can have the fridge next to you. So it's this whole evolutionary challenge or evolutionary driver for maintaining body weight has completely changed. And evolution is not fast enough.
It seems that evolution favors the resculpting of genetics that will gain weight. Now, let's get to the actual environment. You've mentioned fats, and in your study with mice with a high-fat diet, did you exclude sugar? Let's look at the specific environment and what causes the potential resculpting or adapting to that new environment. Is it anything like high calories? Is it high fat? Is it high sugar? Have you been able to identify?
Yeah.
So
we've not systematically looked at that. And that's a little bit because it's, I would call it an exploratory study, which we did. We want to see as a proof of concept what happens. But if we now start actually how we also started the study, we started looking at humans. And we looked at humans which were living with obesity, with quite a significant BMI, mostly I think over 30, 35. And the way these people gained weight and how they at the end ended up living with overweight or obesity, we don't know the full history. We know these are not people who were living with obesity as children. So basically it's not a childhood, there's likely not a pure genetic reason for that weight gain.
Yes.
But probably the way they got this extra kilos is very different. And yet they share transcriptionally, if you now look at we didn't look at the epigenetics in humans, we looked at transcriptional signatures, which is the translation of the genetics into the RNA. And we believe, or we know that the epigenetic is somewhere sitting in between. But in humans, it was at this point still challenging to look at that part. But we see they share very common features. So if we look at now the transcriptional features that are even remaining in these people after their weight loss, based on the bariatric surgery, they have common themes in there. Inflammation, the remodeling, also the adipogenic genes. So that seems to be a common theme in all of them. And if we now go into a very controlled environment, and that's where we then went into an animal model, and we start asking that, we basically wanted to use a system where we can induce weight loss. I call it rather standardized format, high fat. There's also significant calories in there. So it's an environment, maybe not exactly Western diet,
yes,
which then is a lot of sugar, but it's also then, this has sometimes also much more liver effect. We really were focusing on the adipose tissue, just overloading it. And so there, these mice very quickly gain weight, become quite significantly obese. And then we can look at them and we see that many of the changes we see now in the mice are very, in the animals itself is very homogeneous. We can see many animals, very similar features happen. And after weight loss, again, we see transcriptional changes, but still many of these changes that we gain during weight gain are remaining there. So very similar like in the humans, at transcriptional level, we see this phenotype of you change during weight gain, and many of these changes are not erased by subsequent weight loss.
Is it possible to say that the changes you're talking about might be associated with metabolic overall, not just obesity?
It is a tricky one because we definitely have not looked in that detail at it. It's clearly a signature of the adipose tissue adapting to the situation of a metabolic overload, I would say.
Yeah.
We see also genes related to adipogenic potential proliferation. So we see actually many factors. We see inflammation, which obviously again would say is in an overload situation. But I would be actually, let's put it that way, I would be surprised if you now look at other diets which are related to metabolic unhealthy status and we would not find long-term transcription and epigenetic changes. So I think it's a theme which probably applies to many conditions. We just picked one which we now looked in very high detail on it.
Yeah.
Basically, because also we're limited in how much at one time we want to do. And so we rather said we want to do a rather comprehensive phenotyping of one condition rather than just superficial many different things.
Yeah.
But yes, I believe this is not unique to the condition we looked at. It's probably a much more broadly applicable phenomena we see there.
It would be really interesting to have a study that compared high fat and sugar, like specific, like different. And if we see the same kind of changes, I'd just love to see that because we know this in the keto world that people can eat a lot of fat and they don't gain weight. But once they start adding the sugar, it's game over. The weight just shoots up. Yeah.
But our data, honestly said, obviously has a significant amount of sugar in it. So it's not a pure fat diet.
Yeah.
It's actually high in calories
Yes.
overall with sugar. So it's not a keto diet, definitely.
The other thing that you said that's so fascinating is that the memory stays even when the weight has been lost. The person's on the diet and their memory stays. And I think you said earlier, we don't know how long that lasts for, but it does seem to last for a while. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, on the one hand, how long it lasts is always a challenging one because it's proving absence is much more hard than proving presence of something. And I think that's a little bit the challenge we have faced here. So in the humans, we have a bit of follow-up. Obviously, the weight loss period we're looking at is 2 years. That's basically what this people came back to the doctor. We got another sample. We could look at it. And so here we know 2 years. We even have now some samples which go a bit beyond of that. And we still see phenotypes which resemble that. So there seems not to be a loss of that. And it fits a little bit also if you think of adipocytes. These are very long-lived cells. They can live up to 10 years, at least not on our data, but from other people's data. And so really is a cell type which is stable. In the animal model, we're a little bit more limited because animals have a certain lifetime. And so normally a few years maximum. And the intervention we did there was between 3 and 6 months exposed to this high caloric diet. And then we did 2 months initial weight loss, which allowed them to go back to the normal body weight of those which were never exposed to this obesogenic environment. And we extended that weight for 3 months, and we've now gone in a bit longer. We did not see a change. The challenge is that we could obviously keep going until forever. The question is where to end it.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit. And so I don't think the strategy should be in the future just wait. I think we need active modulation in the end that will actually help change that memory. I don't think just waiting, also because that 10 years adipose tissue or the adipocytes can live. I'm not sure if people are willing to wait for 10 years. And then, while we haven't reported in the study, but we've now looked a bit into it, also there are the precursor cells, and they seem also to carry some kind of changes. So it might even be that the next ones already have some changes. And so I don't want to say 10 years and it's all over. I would say It seems like 10 years is easily not over and maybe even longer than that. And that seems to be beyond the period a normal person would want to wait for weight loss to be stable.
So your research, you said, has gone as long as 2 years, and it was sustainable, the change.
That's basically as we collected the tissue samples.
Yeah, that's as far as you got.
Yeah. And this is, so basically that was also how we designed it, because we want to have some significant weight loss, want to look at it, how it changes. So we needed this amount of time in there. But it turned out that this time, this again gives an indication how long and how stable and long lasting these cellular changes are.
That's just a really interesting finding, because even at 2 years, when we look at bariatric surgery and we look at the GLP-1 success, it appears to be that 2.5, 3 years, and then some weight gain starts to happen, which suggests that it's longer than 2 years, but it's at least 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's actually at the moment a big challenge which we will be facing, that with all of these new interventions that we have, particularly the weight loss drugs.
Yes.
We're obviously entering a phase where a lot of people will be taking them. I'm not sure what at the moment the US system is, but at least in Switzerland, the maximum duration people get that prescribed is 2 years. I think there's normally, or people that have done weight loss success, let's go that way, they've lost the amount of weight that was possible on those drugs. And there's also a lot of the side effects which kick in. Probably there's some nausea, sometimes people are affected. It's costly, it's expensive. People, as I said, have lost weight. So really the incentive to maintain these drugs is not always there. Talking with some of the colleagues here, they always start modifying, the people start dosing them down to reduce costs, to maybe also side effects to reduce them. And I think there's going to be a lot of interesting work now that has to be done. But if we would look at our data, we would say taking these drugs off and completely going back, letting people relapse, is likely not the best solution. And we need to think of better strategies.
Here in Canada and in America, we say this is a lifelong process. I've never heard the term that it's 2 years and you're off.
Well, maybe to correct it, I know that insurance companies here in Switzerland, they start now paying for that medication in the context of overweight and weight loss.
Or diabetes.
And I think diabetes maybe is slightly different because there's obviously a chronic long-term cause, and which is not also resolved normally. But if people take this drug and lose weight and actually achieve maximum weight loss possible on the drug, this is treatment success, I would say. And once treatment success is achieved, I think in most contexts, at least so far, people start considering that it's now no need anymore. So basically you stop treatment. And I think this is something that has to be considered. And I'm not an expert on the treatment itself. Basically, we look at it from a more academic side, but I feel there's a lot of things that have to be thought about. And I think it's important to not just say, we achieved 15, 20% weight loss, we're done.
Yes.
Because based on our data, and I think also the just purely observational data from the clinics, it's actually not solved.
You mentioned inflammation. How does inflammation play a role in all of this?
In that case, I have to say, so far we obviously looked more from a descriptive and observational point of it. So we have not yet tried to really see, is inflammation driving that weight regain? I think that's what before I was trying a little bit to say is our part mostly is we see an association, weight loss, epigenetic changes long-term, the likelihood of the real weight gain in humans and also in the animal model. But we have not yet been able to say this specific factor, that's the one causing it. Given that we see now at the epigenetic level that many of the genes which are deregulated during obesity remain deregulated, it is suggestive that these possibly are also ones allowing weight regain. Is it truly like that? That's work we're actually starting now doing. We're looking into it both on the side of artificial engineering that or removing it. And maybe that we're getting closer to a causality and saying that's what we need to address.
Okay, I'm trying to apply this to our day-to-day life. This explains our yo-yo phenomena. You lose the weight and then you gain it back. But it does seem to be that those who had pronounced weight at one point are more likely to gain weight faster than somebody who's just starting out.
Obviously, the animal study is slightly different to the human environment. The animals don't have, unfortunately, that free choice of food they would want to have. And that's probably experiments we should do where we give them a food choice.
Yes.
And then see if they would have a different food choice based on the prior diet. And so the experiment we did was a bit of a more simplistic one where we then re-exposed them, both a control group, which has never been in an obesogenic environment, and a group which has been exposed to that, to a challenge, kind of an obesogenic challenge with a very high caloric diet. And what our data indicates is that those which have prior been, let's call it trained, and have gained that memory, what we find, these are the ones who are much better in using or taking in this energy much faster weight gaining. Equally, if we now go even at a cellular level, so what we have done, we've taken out adipocytes of mice which have either been before obese or those which have never been obese. And we try to compare if we now stimulate them with either fat or sugar and ask how much can they take up and how quick. We actually see those adipocytes which kind of have been trained, it's called trained, because they have before being in this obesogenic environment, they are better at doing that. They're much faster. They take up more in a shorter, or they just take up more. And that would indicate that this program, which we talked before on, an adipocyte being constantly exposed to an obesogenic environment, maybe has learned to adapt to that environment to better cope with that. And that seems to be not have lost despite the weight loss. And so that's maybe partially explaining what's happening. At the same time, I don't think that's a little bit with the causal again. I don't think we can at this point say we explain this faster re-weight gain. We see it coincides with the epigenetic memory. Sorry, I'm a little bit cautious about it because I think it's an important concept because I don't believe at the end the adipose tissue is the main and only driver of this weight regain. I think adipose tissue is a very important part of whole body physiology, particularly in the context of obesity, weight changes, body weight control. But at the end of the day, food intake and food and energy usage, so basically how much we energy expenditure, energy uptake, that's the key determinants. And so these have to be balanced to maintain body weight. If we eat more than we actually use, we will gain weight and vice versa. And so we have to play around with those. And these are actually controlled in the brain, in the particular hypothalamus. And that are regions which are, again, sensitive to signals coming from the adipose tissue. So the adipose tissue may, again, here play a very important role by sending signals to the brain, modifying how much food we use, how much we move, our energy expenditure overall. And so this whole very intricate interaction, that's probably the key driver in which then is affected. Okay. And likely, I would believe epigenetic changes will change how the adipocytes signal, how they affect with the brain and all of these processes.
Yeah, so the person still has, in a sense, a memory of being fat, and that drives their appetite even when they're no longer. So what about other cells? You mentioned it's not just the adipose tissue. Is a person who is predisposed to a cardiac atherosclerosis still at risk even when they lose weight? Does the obesogenic memory still work there?
Let's put it that way. I have to speculate. Okay, because we have not particularly looked at that example.
Yes.
And I think there's several factors. Obviously, if you think of atherosclerosis, the position, the kind of that we have some deposition in the arteries, and then with the macrophages that can kind of get us increase or limit the blood flow. I would believe probably that there is some type of that too. There may be cellular change in terms of cells accumulating and being there. Yeah. Obviously, lipids. It's probably from condition to condition going to be slightly varying. But what I would say, overall, our body is made to be able to dynamically respond to environment. And I think that's where the epigenetic plays a key role. As I said, I would even believe in a starving situation. If basically you don't eat today, you wouldn't want to wake up tomorrow and the body not being adjusted to being in a very low energy state. You would want to have it. So basically the whole body will remodel to that condition. And so will basically a little bit learn that. And that's manifesting in some epigenetic changes. And that's probably is not true only for the fat tissue. It will be true for the liver, for the muscle, and likely, and I think that's very important, the brain too.
Is there something that we can do about this situation? Is it possible to modify or even erase obesogenic memory through active behavior? So obviously we don't want to wait the 10 years for the fat cells to regenerate, but is there something that we can do?
So the reality is, and I don't want to make it sound too depressing, at this point we don't know. And I think for all of the interventions that on the basic stuff we have looked at, we have not yet found the trigger to change it. I still believe it is, and for a very simple reason, because it's, again, epigenetics and epigenetic changes. And we know we have actually the cellular machinery. So we have very specific writers and erasers of this epigenetic modification. So our body has the capability to change that. And I think what we at this point missing is the specific stimulus, the trigger. And that's, I think, the one we now have to find. We need to find the trigger which will actually tell the cell to remodel, to rewrite the epigenome, to then actually be in the state of losing that memory, which is built up during this obesogenic environment.
Yeah.
An ideal scenario, this would be some stimulus that we can know, can be pharmacological, maybe there's some more changes in lifestyle, maybe some diets. So far, if you just look at, I said, lifestyle interventions seem to be very short lasting. So people maintaining body weight loss was not successful. So it seems to be something, either we don't know yet what it is or which stimulus we need, we're lacking that. And the second way, and I think that's where we're very excited because, again, it comes more the molecular side in it, in a directed, targeted fashion to rewrite the epigenome. That's work we're also doing now in the lab. Starting thinking about, we know now where things are. We know which epigenetic information has changed. We know what we may need to change back because we know the healthy, the lean state, and we know the post-obese state. Why not rewrite that? Why not just actively modify it? It's not easy because it's not just one side, it's many sides, it's different directions. But we're developing the tools to be able to, in a couple of years, hopefully, to start at least testing that in an experimental system and maybe in the long term, even in humans.
But long-term in humans, it wouldn't be for you and I because our genetics are already sculpted, trained. It would be for children or ongoing, right?
No, I would actually think also for us, because the idea behind that would be our epigenome has maybe adapted to a certain state, but in principle can adapt to a new one. So if you or I would now be gaining significant weight and become obese, our epigenome would have to remodel to that state of living with that obese challenge.
We could potentially remodel.
And so the idea is, and all of these changes are very dynamic. We can remodel them. So the potential is there. It's just knowing how, and it's unfortunately a rather experimental state still, and not too many tools are existing yet, particularly for human use. And the other side is, maybe just to quickly also add on that, so far, most of our dietary intervention we do obviously with primary goal is always weight loss. We want to see, can we achieve weight loss? And I think that's all. Also, all the weight loss drugs, that's the primary target. But we know with these epigenetic changes, we actually find specific molecular changes. And maybe, and that's a little bit part of the work we're doing, maybe the goal that we want to achieve is not weight loss in the first place, but remodeling those sites, these epigenetic targets, and that maybe then actually remove that memory and then combine them with a weight loss. So maybe actually a two-sided approach. We need to lose the weight, we need to remodel the epigenome, and may not be exactly the same stimulus which achieves both. And so far, obviously, if you only focus on weight loss, you may just don't look for the other because there's no need. You have no way to look that it changes. We don't know what to look for. Still, I can't promise you that next year we have something, but it's clearly an area we're exploring and thinking about it. And probably not only us, but also many people outside of our colleagues.
So I guess the bottom line here is don't train your fat cells to grow because they will remember that. And then once that's happened, this explains why it's so hard to maintain weight loss until we have a solution that actually works on the sculpting, the training.
Yeah, I would say if I want to have a kind of a take-home message or take-home recommendation, I would clearly say that the one is prevention is key. So basically, you never train your fat to be living in this obesogenic environment or being overweight. That's the best. And I think we have to start very early on. I think for children, we really know this is long-term has an effect. So that should be public health. I think that's really what is their effect. And we should think about that and implement as much as possible. And the other message, which I think is also quite relevant, in all of our studies, being in the human, being in the animal studies, the weight loss has significant metabolic improvements. I mean, despite it being very hard to maintain the weight loss status, the beneficial effects of it are undoubtedly there. So the people are improving metabolic health, improved glucose levels go down, fitness goes up. So it's worthwhile losing weight. And maybe for those who are struggling with that, it's also a bit of a thinking of the fact that it's hard. It's not that they are weak. It's rather that probably is many molecular process behind there, which kind of doesn't like it to be there. And yet it's good. And so maybe it helps people. It's contradicting myself a little bit by saying it's not willpower, lack of willpower that people regain weight, but maybe knowing that it's not the lack of willpower, it helps actually people to rather be able to longer maintain this lifestyle intervention, to really work on it and not give up so much.
Yes.
But I think it's important to remember that.
Yes, thank you. In closing, what is next for you? It sounds like you've got some exciting ideas.
I think obviously this remodeling and actively reshaping the epigenome is one of the areas we're really excited about. And in parallel to that, obviously, a little bit of what you touched on, is it just the fat? I think the brain is very important. Other organs are very important. The muscle, we sometimes talk about muscle memory. That's the area which we are at the moment very fascinated. Can be long to train the muscle, has its positive effects. But clearly, what change also happened in the brain? The whole idea of the set point theory. Are we able to find things which could contribute to that and maybe explain that? And at the end, modify it, regulate it. That's really where we want to go. And I think with many things we want to do, we have more things we would want to do than we can do.
Great, thank you. So last question. If you could tell a younger version of yourself something about your work right now, what would it be? About fat cell memory or?
This is a good question in terms of, because I would even say a lot of what we found is the thing we actually expected. It's what I meant before. There's a lot of literature on obesogenic memory, nutrition memory. And in the end, what was lacking is a bit people doing it in a controlled way, looking for it. And so that way, I don't think I could have told myself so much before and other than just do it and look for it. It's the fact that nobody's reported doesn't mean it's not there. It's just nobody has actually gone the process and the methodology was lacking. So in that way, but I think, so it's not maybe the perfect answer, but it felt like we've proven something which we expect to find. And at the end, we're very excited about finding it because it's still somewhat surprising that it's truly there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for a really interesting and sad phenomena, but nevertheless, very interesting. Thank you.
But maybe just to say, I don't think we have to think of it sad because it means it allows actually our body to adapt to environmental changes.
Yes.
And one thing also we could think of what is starvation, many other sides which are important. And maybe actually this gives a survival advantage in the past of being able to do that. I think there's a evolution, it makes sense. We're just unfortunately living in an environment where it's not that useful anymore to have.
Exactly. All right.
But thanks a lot. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us the time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group. I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.